Greetings. Part 2, the French Revolution, the terror. Okay, so I'm starting to sound a bit like Edmund Burke, aren't I? He was the father of conservatism. So let me just give you the quote. So, in Reflections on the Revolution in France, Edmund Burke argued that the French Revolution would end with terror, right, and mayhem because of its abstract rational foundation. So he said the same sort of thing as me. So he didn't say the same thing. I'll explain a bit further why my view is different to Edmund Burke's. Okay. So he believed its abstract nature disregarded the complex and multifaceted features of human nature and society. Burke, he was a progressive. He supported the American Revolution, but he then became the father of modern conservatism. He thought we should be loyal to existing values regardless of their rational basis then. That's the difference. So Burke threw out the rational baby with the revolutionary bathwater. The last video we did on the terror, I did it in a different part of the island with the same t-shirt, right? Okay. It was a bit windy there. So the last video was mainly historical. It was for context to see, you know, what happened in revolutions historically, how the revolutions went down that path in historical terms. But today, we're going to look at the philosophical grounds for the terror. And many philosophers have laid the blame at Immanuel Kant's door. Very naughty. And in particular, his idea of the moral law as the philosophical backdrop to the terror. So way back in Hegel's first work, The Spirit of Christianity, he said that Kant's moral law had the same drawbacks as the abstract external law of the Abrahamic law in the Old Testament, okay? And we saw in an earlier video how the law of Abraham, which is the first video we did, the law of Abraham broke the bonds of love, or the traditional tribal society, those bonds, and he replaced it with law, God's law. Hegel argued that the teachings of Jesus were a superior ethical model to Kant's moral law. He says, to complete subjection under the law of an alien lord, Jesus opposed not a partial subjection under a law of one's own, the self-coercion of Kantian virtue, but virtues without lordship and without submission, i.e. virtues as modifications of love. As I said before, in video 1, I explained that in the spirit of Christianity, one of Hegel's foundational concepts wasn't recognition, but love. Love united society. Small town Germany was the canvas Hegel painted upon, just like the film, remember, It's a Wonderful Life, where the main character, the life of the main character, George Bailey, Jimmy Stewart, yeah? He touches on everybody else's life. The famous line, I'm going to jail, everybody. Hegel changed his mind in phenomenology about love because of the rise of capitalism and when he read the readings of the Scottish economists like Adam Smith and others, including, if you remember, Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart was also, not the one out of It's a Wonderful Life, but James Stewart, was a Scottish economist from that same Scottish Enlightenment. And when he read this, he read their work, he sort of agreed with this concept of the invisible hand, which is, the bees, the fable of the bees we also mentioned, which is that through people's unintentional actions, good things happen. So seeking virtue in itself is not good, but if you do something else like go and build a shack and sell water on the beach down there, that helps other people. So this invisible hand concept, which was a foundational concept of capitalism. Hegel's successor concept, therefore, to love in phenomenology, it wasn't the invisible hand. It was something different, but he was learning a lesson. His successor concept to love wasn't the invisible hand, it was recognition. That to me is a sign. Recognition is a sign, in the same way as love is, it's a sign of human frailty and vulnerability. Hegel sees an enormous danger in the project of unfettered reason, this absolute freedom we talked about in the last video. The freedom of all external constraints, all laws, just reason wins out. And he does this because it's built on an abstract model of society that closed off the possibility of human vulnerability. To be vulnerable means to be fallible. And absolute freedom does not admit the possibility for reason to be fallible, to be in error. Why does Kant therefore get such a bad rap for being somehow responsible for the terror bit of the revolution? Kant held that the only actions which had moral worth were those done from duty. Morality and the moral law required us to do our duty, denying, if necessary, all our natural preferences. This is a summary of Kant. In Kant's view, the moral law is the law of our own reason. And to follow it is to be free. Because our will may be ruled by our impulses and our natural instincts, we aren't free. Because we could be slave to our passions. Nah, give me now, I'm going to eat that now. Or, oh, look at that woman over there. Or I want to drive a car at 100 miles an hour. Robespierre said, they're your passions. That's slave to your passions. Okay, so Robespierre said, freedom consists in obeying laws. This is his quote. It's a really great quote because I'll read it to you in full because it sounds like Kant could have written it. Robespierre. Freedom consists in obeying laws that one has given oneself, and servitude consists in being forced to submit oneself to an alien will. That's my French accent. That sounds very similar to subjecting yourself to the moral law of Immanuel Kant, doesn't it, really? Come on. It sounds like Kant's written that for him. He hasn't. That's what the post-revolution thinkers picked up on. So everyone noticed the difference, the similarities between Robespierre and virtue. Everyone did. It wasn't like I'm making it up now, 200 years. No, everyone thought it like that. So Heinrich Heine remarked that Kant had far surpassed Robespierre in intellectual terrorism. Again, that sounds a bit far-fetched. Intellectual terrorism, come off it. Heine, though, he wasn't a right-wing reactionary. He wasn't like who was the guy at the beginning? I've forgotten. I've just said his name. The father of modern conservatism. Burke. Edmund Burke. He wasn't Edmund Burke. Checking my notes. Edmund Burke. He wasn't a reactionary. He was a poet and a writer with radical political ideas, and he influenced, and I think he knew Karl Marx. But the link he makes between Kant and the terror, it's interesting and pertinent. Here's his quote, his full quote on Kant. Now, it's over the top. And it is funny, it's meant to be funny, but it's relevant. So he describes Kant in this. The history of Immanuel Kant's life is difficult to portray, for he had neither life nor history. He led a mechanical, regular, almost abstract bachelor existence in a little retired street of Königsberg, that's Kaliningrad now, an old town on the northeastern frontier of Germany. I do not believe that the great clock of the cathedral performed in a more passionless and methodical manner its daily routine than did its townsman, Immanuel Kant. Rising in the morning, coffee drinking, writing, reading lectures, dining, walking, everything had its appointed time. And the neighbours knew that it was exactly 3:30 when Kant stepped forth from his house in his grey, tight-fitting coat with his Spanish cane in his hand, and betook himself to the little Linden Avenue, called after him to this day the Philosopher's Walk. Summer and winter he walked up and down it 8 times, and when the weather was dull or heavy, or heavy clouds prognosticated rain, the townspeople beheld his servant, the old lamper, trudging anxiously behind Kant with a big umbrella under his arm, like an image of Providence. What a strange contrast did this man's outward life present to his destructive, world-annihilating thoughts. In sooth, had the citizens of Königsberg had the least suspicion of the full significance of his ideas, they would have felt far more awful dread at the presence of this man than at the sight of an executioner, who can but kill the body. The link with the terror and Kant goes like this. Kant argues that the moral law is binding a priori. It doesn't depend on contingency or the specific nature of the objects we desire. It doesn't depend on anything in the real world. It's just binding no matter what. The command to follow the moral law, come what may, we call, or they call, autonomy, true autonomy. Any deviation from the moral law is unfreedom. If we follow it, we have a universal system of moral and ethical judgments that binds us all as rational subjects at all times. Now that's pretty straightforward. And you know what? I was thinking about this. We all need a little bit of Immanuel Kant in it. There's no one who's just going to spontaneously I'll just do whatever. You just need an Immanuel Kant who's, a bit like Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio. Oh God, not a bit, but you need it. I think we need it anyway. But let's carry on with the argument. So, this law is binding on us at all times. We've got to act, though, not only morally, but also from the right motive. And now, the right motive means to exercise, again, the rational will. So, if you see your friend wearing a new hat and they ask you how it looks, you've got to tell them the truth, because that's part of the moral law. And you've got to exercise that will rationally, because if everyone tells the truth, society will be better. So you've got to say, you can't say with the moral law, oh, your hat looks great, because and it looks terrible, right? Because not lying to a friend comes really high on how a vision of Kantian ethical life should be lived. And if we regularly lie to suit our own ends, to make us feel better, we'd live in a dog-eat-dog society. So, you know what I mean? He does, he's got a point, and you can't go around lying all the time but freedom, therefore, it does clash with inclination. It's the inclination to say, do you know what? Even if the hat, he's got a giant banana or like a penis hat on, and he doesn't realize it, you've still got to say, you look amazing. You just look amazing. You look really good. You don't want to hurt the feelings, and you don't want to feel bad. But this inflexible view, but Kant is saying you've got to tell them the truth. The inflexible view that Kant has of doing the right thing means being in constant struggle with yourself. That's the problem. And humans are natural beings, and our desires and inclinations are extremely difficult to exactly match with the demands of a morality of pure reason. So people, I really want to drive, I said before, that car at 100 miles an hour. Oh, look at that man or woman, whoever it is, that you've, really want. All of those inclinations, I'm trying to think of extreme inclinations. I'm trying to think of some less extreme inclinations than driving a car at 100 miles an hour or fancying someone that you shouldn't fancy and chasing after them. But I'm sure you could fill in that. But you get my point about inclination. Whatever your natural inclinations are, they're difficult to exactly match with. Even saying that hat looks nice, it's difficult to match with the demands of pure reason. And the last video I explained how Kant, he thought that the task of moral self-perfection was unrealistic in this life alone. And therefore, he believed there had to be an afterlife, because once we're dead, we'd still need an eternity to complete the job of being a completely moral being. Because he knew it's a hard job doing it, and it'd take more than a lifetime. In another sense, the Kantian autonomous moral self-perfection, it does need to be completed, though, in this world. Okay, he's going to individually, you might do it in the next world, but there is an obligation upon us to do something in this world and to change this world. Otherwise, the moral law is pointless just in your own head. It's got to be externalized. And therefore, that's how the stiff young radicals of the French Revolution took Kant to be. That's the link. Critics of Kant thought that the French revolutionaries were simply following his moral law. That's how they saw it. Stripping away inclination from the world meant that reason wore a Robespierrean coldness an automatic, an autonomous. It wasn't autonomous. It was being an automaton in a sense. Yes, we must execute that person. They are not sufficiently virtuous, and so we can see that um, from an outsider's perspective, internally they thought they were being virtuous, but from an outsider's perspective, someone like Burke, who was a conservative, you can see how he saw it. So my view is that Hegel thought the reign of terror, it was just the price humanity paid for the move towards a constitutional order. Now, we're living in a time right now when I'm making this video, you've got a war in Ukraine, you've got a war in the Middle East, you've got a war between Israel and Hamas. And it's just terrible, isn't it? It's absolutely awful. And I think the response to many young people today, which is a response that I probably would have had, was, oh, all war is bad. We need to just stop it. Let's just have a world like, bit of wacky backy. Oh, man, chill out, man. Bit of kumbaya. Oh, my Lord, my sweet Lord. I really want to see you, Lord. I really want to know you, Lord, because it took so long, my Lord. What's his name? One of the Beatles sang that one. So that's the world that we probably all fantasize it was like that, but it ain't. And that, I think, is why Hegel is such a realistic philosopher. He's saying, he's not saying it's great, there's a war in the Middle East. These are, hundreds of thousands of people, soldiers, when I hear from stories from people with these funerals in Ukraine, it's just heartbreaking. And, I don't know what I'd do. I don't know what individuals would do. What Hegel's saying is that this is a terrible price humanity pays. It's just within us. We can't do anything about it. It's getting worse, isn't it? The world is like more violent, it seems, than it's been in like 100 years. And he's saying that it's part of who we are, this world. And he's fighting, I think, for a constitutional order. And he's optimistic about it as well, I think. At the same time, I don't know whether this is a contradiction, but because of Martin Luther, Germany seemed to be a way around the terror. Because Germany had the Reformation and had achieved a certain amount of secularization, the power of the church, the Catholic Church, was broken. Hegel seems to have seen Lutheranism as a road which was able to bypass the Enlightenment to an extent. Now, I could have that wrong. That's a reading, my tentative reading of it. On the other hand, Hegel seems to have welcomed the French Revolution. I've just got to leave it up to you to resolve that apparent contradiction. Maybe someone's written a paper on it. Maybe there's a philosopher out there who's written something. And if they ever see this video, maybe they can say, aha, here's the answer here. But to make things even more complicated, I want to bring in our friend Heinrich Heine. Right. I've just read a biography of him recently as well. Maybe Germany avoided the terror due to Luther, but Lutheranism was actually a barrier to something else, according to Heine. This is just a slight digression. France suffered from the terror of the Enlightenment, but Germany suffered a different fate. In 1835, nearly 100 years before Hitler and the Nazi Party seized power in Germany, Heine wrote in his essay, The History of Religion and Philosophy in Germany. Okay, I'm sure you've all read that one. But here's an amazing quote. Christianity, and that is its greatest merit. By the way, Heine was a Jew, so he was not a Lutheran or is from a Jewish background. He didn't really fit in anywhere, but he had Jewish heritage. This is an important thing to note. So it's not someone who's fully signed up to Christianity. We're talking about someone with a complex background. So Heine said, Christianity, and that's its greatest merit, has somewhat mitigated the brutal Germanic love of war, but it could not destroy it. Should that subduing talisman, the cross, be shattered, the frenzied madness of the ancient warriors, the insane berserk rage of which the Nordic bards have spoken and sung so often, will once more burst into flame. The talisman is fragile, and the day will come when it collapses miserably. Then the ancient stony gods will rise from the forgotten debris and rub the dust of 1,000 years from their eyes. And finally, Thor, with his giant hammer, will jump up and smash the Gothic cathedrals. Do not smile at my advice, the advice of a dreamer who warns you against Kantians. Fichteans, and other philosophers of nature. Do not smile at the visionary who anticipates the same revolution in the realm of the visible as has taken place in the spiritual. Thought precedes action as lightning precedes thunder. German thunder is of true Germanic character. It is not very nimble, but rumbles along ponderously. Yet it will come, and when you hear it, when you hear a crashing such as never before has been heard in the world's history, then you know that the German thunderbolt has fallen at last. At that uproar, the eagles of the air will drop dead, and the lions of the remotest deserts in Africa will hide in their royal dens. A play will be performed in Germany which will make the French Revolution look like an innocent idyll. Now, I've got to quote that. It's just such a brilliant quote, a prediction of what Nazi Germany would look like. And what Heine's saying, and I think it's a sort of Hegelian thing because he was influenced by Hegel, you can see that the Lutheranism was an enormous step forward. Lutheranism stopped, in his view, the excesses of this. Okay, Nazism was a modern fellow, but nevertheless, it drew on these subterranean, Nordic, Germanic, horrible, primitive urges. Anyway, that's maybe me going over the top. But Heine, as well as Hegel, religion, let's bring it down a notch, okay? He thinks that religion provides a mediating role. It's a buffer. This is the main point. Maybe I was a flight of fancy, I said, but religion's a buffer because human reason doesn't have all the answers. So I read in a book, it's about the black churches in America. And the author said this: religion is an admission of our own limitations as humans because we have to rely on God. And the danger of abstraction, the abstraction of absolute freedom, was that it was simply a concept. And not just a concept, but also an illusion about the world. One other thing to mention in relation to France and the Enlightenment. Kant, he was Mr. Cerebral, as you might have noticed from the quote from Heine earlier. He said, avoid inclinations, do the right thing. But the Enlightenment was more than just the nerdlingers of the moral law. The Enlightenment was also about materialism, so it wasn't just boffins and people thinking about spiritual thoughts about the moral law and up there. It was also about materialism. Karl Marx admitted that the 18th century French materialism was part of his intellectual inheritance. But Marx's successor Lenin seemed to have been more of a materialist than Marx, even though I've heard some people talk about, a few writers have said, oh, when Lenin read Hegel, it flipped his mind and he started doing all this dialectical stuff like that. So that's crap, I'm afraid. I can come back in another video. I completely reject that. And there's lots of evidence to say that. He was absolutely a hardline materialist, even though he said on one occasion, oh, Hegel's groovy because he's got these interesting idealist thoughts. But he just wasn't. He wrote this massive book, Empirio-Criticism, and then he republished it in 1921. So he was just a hardline materialist. And that's nothing wrong with that. But he was different to Marx in terms of his philosophical interpretation. Anyway, let's not go there. So materialism explains the world as matter, and the motions and properties of matter explain all phenomena. Okay, that's straightforward. And Marx, in his essay on French materialism in the 18th century, says mechanical French materialism absorbed the physics of Descartes, the metaphysics of the 17th century, as specifically represented for France by Descartes, had materialism for its antagonist from its hour of birth. So he's saying there was this split in materialism. In person, this antagonist confronted Descartes in the shape of Gassendi, the restorer of Epicurean materialism. The followers of Babeuf were crude, uncivilized materialists, but even fully developed communism derived directly from French materialism. So that's Marx on materialism. And just to say that what he's saying is that Descartes represented a more, this idea of like just the mind floating around, a free floating mind. Okay, the mind's up there, and down here is materialism, and the two of them never met. And Gassendi and others were going, no, it's all about atoms firing in your head, and that's what we are. a combination of atoms. We're walking atoms, we're walking molecules. And Gracchus Babeuf, who you mentioned, he represented the most radical element of the French Revolution. So it wasn't just people who were coming up with fancy theoretical stuff. It was people who believed in the down and dirty materialism of action and doing stuff, and the fact that we're just kind of moving embodiments of molecules. Now let's look at Lenin. He expresses the difference between idealism and materialism like this. So we know that there's a split. Idealism, everything's in the head. Materialism, everything's material. And he says, materialism is the recognition of objects in themselves or objects outside the mind. The ideas and sensations are copies or images of these objects. Now he conflates a lot there. Realism is that it's not necessarily materialism. It's a form of realism, materialism, to say that there are real objects out there. There's really a beach out there, and there's some of those volcanoes, and there's a sky. That's actually a form of realism, independent of our heads. But what he's also saying, the next leap, is that the mind is a copy of the world of molecules. So that is translate what you're seeing there gets copied like a photocopier in your head. So that's what your mind is. It just produces copies, doesn't make stuff. It's like faithfully reproduces. And if you get a correct reproduction of the world, you've solved it. You've bridged the mind-body problem because you've got the most faithful reproduction of what that looks like. Having said that, if you're a surrealist painter or if you're even an impressionist and you try and paint this scene, it's going to look different to a photograph. And some people say that grasps it better. But that's for another time. But you can get my view of what materialism, if you adopt this very strictly materialist view of the world, it's a copy. So that's the Lenin bit. One last thing, an observation of my own. So the Marquis de Sade, you know, that's actually, no, that's not de Sade, that's Massacres, and that's Masok. Masok's from Ukraine, isn't he? But de Sade's from France. So de Sade is, inflict a lot of pain, usually for like sexual pleasure, I think, is the sadism thing. That's Marquis de Sade famously said this. And he lived throughout the revolutionary period. And he was a supporter of the revolution. He was also famously a materialist, and I'm going to explain this. So he came from that French materialism background. So there's two bits to this enlightenment. Also, in the Marquis de Sade's defense, he did, according to him, and I think he was probably right on this, he did help a fair number of people escape the guillotine. He could have blew people up, and he didn't. He could have been, had a certificate de civisme, a certificate to show that he was a great person, and he didn't. He saved people. So someone who's a sadist can do good things, as we know. Hitler liked dogs, so there's not that he's Hitler. The Marquis de Sade wasn't Hitler, but I'm saying that he was. Let's leave the Marquis de Sade's personal life out of it. But what he did was, he had a view of absolute freedom, and we talked about Hegel's view of absolute freedom in relation to just it being a rational concept that we apply to the world, not a rational, like an idealist concept, one that we cook up on our own heads about the model law, and then we apply it to the world. And we saw how this absolute freedom, it's an assertion of the self by applying absolute or pure reason. So we assert ourselves when we do this, and that's freedom. Now, de Sade is the other side of the coin. If for Kant, the self is an assertion of the moral law, do the right thing, the Marquis de Sade is a perverted twin of Kant. I hate to say that, but what I mean is they've got the same enlightenment source, which is an interpretation of what the self is and how the self expands itself into the world. De Sade also believes in doing the right thing, but for de Sade, the right thing is to follow your inclinations, because this is a rational course of action. So if I can get my own way by murder and get away with it, then my rational course of action could very easily be murder. If I can get away with it, if I can kill you, I think, what's wrong with that? So in a sense, the Marquis de Sade is also following a rational course of events. He's not following the moral law. He's saying, do whatever. Do it. Nike, just do it. Because this is an expression of the self, he took this materialist interpretation of the self to its outer limit, frankly. I mean, it is silly, but he did. I'm just explaining how the French Revolution has the same source and different interpretations, materialism, idealism, that seem to get mixed up together. The fittest, this is de Sade's view, the fittest and most able, they could kill, rape, and dominate at will, and their only limitation is the ability of the victim to resist. No one is accountable for their drives. You weren't given your drives. I wasn't given my drives. I don't have drive, by the way. I just do what everyone tells me to do. But other people's drive, people have these fierce drives. No one gives it to them, I don't think. But they don't ask to have these drives. They don't have the desire to smoke a ciggy every day or to take drugs. They're controlled by the drugs in some ways, or they're controlled by their desire to have the drugs or the desire to have a fag. And they try and go on all these programs and it doesn't work. So they, in some senses, are it's not their fault they've got these drives. But because no one's accountable for the drives, we are all free to follow them if we can get away with it. And for de Sade, there's no difference between murder and death by natural causes, because both are just rearranging atoms. One's quicker than another way, and we're all just atoms. We're all just molecules. Bit of a Leninist, really, in some ways, de Sade. Bit harsh on Lenin, that, of course. So nature is just a single-minded, this is a quote, a single-minded, it's not from de Sade, but it's a book on de Sade. Nature is just a single-minded reprocessing factory. All moral values fall. Ethics become redundant. The view that ethics, because they're non-material, are simply romantic, idealistic illusions. That's a danger that perhaps Hegel and Schelling were deeply concerned about. I'm going to leave the Marquis de Sade at this point. It's a weird road that I don't want to go down this road, but I do think he's interesting. We could come back in another video and do him. Ironically, the view of reason as a mechanical process following iron laws, that is something that has followed every revolution, the path of every revolution. High ideals like virtue, the virtue of Robespierre, the dialectical materialism of the Bolsheviks, maybe in one of the greatest ironies of history, they quickly transformed into material reprocessing factories to kill people as quickly as possible. The 20th century also saw the absence of any ideals at all, with the mass murder and the Nazi extermination camps, as foreseen by Heine. So that was another path that humanity took. But the Enlightenment path, maybe that was Enlightenment, maybe that's for another time, but I won't go into the parallels and the hugely significant differences between Nazism and other things that happened in the 20th century that were founded on Enlightenment ideals, because I think Nazism was anti-Enlightenment. That's my view, quite firmly. I won't go into here, but it's, I think Heine's point, it's not Enlightenment Nazism, far from it. It used certain Enlightenment tools, but it was anti-Enlightenment. Okay, so moving on. Hegel's view on religion, the mediating role, it can be summed up in a debate I saw on YouTube between Mehdi Hasan, who was a news anchor in CNN, and Richard Dawkins. I'm going to finish this particular gig today. Because, so that's the terror. That's the terror for you. That's why Hegel thought the terror. People following Kant's moral law. You follow the law, you do the right thing becomes the wrong thing, and you end up going, as many revolutionaries do, how the hell did I get here? You know, you're up to your waist in blood and you don't know how you got there. You were just trying to do the right thing. Okay, but this Mehdi Hasan and the Richard Dawkins debate, it was brilliant, right? Because I really like Richard Dawkins. And Mehdi Hasan's a brilliant host, but he's a fruitcake, and I'll tell you why. But they're both wrong in this video, so I'll summarize this. So if you type in Mehdi Hasan and Richard Dawkins, the debate. So Mehdi Hasan said, he's challenged by Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins says, you surely don't believe that the Prophet Muhammad went to heaven on a winged horse and he split the moon in two. And Mehdi Hassan said, I do believe that. And Richard Dawkins said, oh, come off it. You know, you can't, I need evidence. Where is the evidence that he did that? And then Mehdi Hassan said, you can't prove that it didn't happen. Now, Richard Dawkins goes, oh, come on, which we'd all say, come on, that's ridiculous. What he should have said, you can't really prove a negative. That would have been a quick response, because you can prove anything. But it's a bit like unicorns that exist, isn't it? It's that argument that Mehdi Hassan, which is, look, I can say to you, here's a true statement. This is a true statement. Only maidens can tame unicorns, and unicorns have a single horn in their head, and they are white. Now, I can say that's a true statement. So there's a difference between what is true and whether stuff exists. Existence and truth are two different things. So you can have two truth statements that are completely different. One is a unicorn's got a horn, no, but because unicorns don't exist, it's got to have, as Kant would point out, Kant says, look, if it can't be tested by your senses, forget it. It doesn't exist. So someone who believes in it, and this faith thing that we have, where people say, I just believe in it, everyone's got their own beliefs. Well, if it's not testable in the real world, then there are big questions to be asked. So Dawkins is 100% right. Like, come on, stop being ridiculous, Mehdi. But what, and then they also have an argument where Mehdi Hassan says, religion's done a lot of good things in the world. And Dawkins says, no, it hasn't. People have done good in the world, despite what religion's done. So I think, though, that the difference is that religion, which is a sign of human fallibility. So Dawkins is a bit like Reason. He's Mr. Reason, isn't he, Richard Dawkins? I just love him. He's great. But he says, you know, show me the evidence and I'll believe it. And Mehdi Hassan says, I can just believe anything I want to. And you can't disprove it. And religion's done a lot of good things because, you know, this fellow's done something good. And it's all true, right? Loads of people have done great things in religion. But I think the thing about religion is a sign of human fallibility. So I was looking on the news, and then at the time, it's in Gaza, and you see people who've lost everything, and they're saying, I've lost everything, lost my family, but I still have Allah. I still have God. And that means the power of religion, the power of human fallibility, and I've got nothing. And you think, oh, it'll get rid of religion, that. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. It strengthens religion. Because when people are at the most vulnerable, people have suffered the most, that is a sign, look, I'm abject. You know, my life's gone that way. And that's what you can rely on. So that's the power of religion. It's why, you know, Hegel doesn't just mean Lutheranism by that. That's why, right, okay, I was walking last night in Arrecife, and I was walking past this. I'm not in a very well-appointed part of it. It's not like here, which is gorgeous, right? I was walking in, like, when I went to get my car, right, the hire car. So the fella said, where's your address? So I told him my address. And he went, oh, it's a bad place, that. What you mean? Oh, no, go there, but don't go. That district is terrible. So I went for a walk last night, and I kind of get it now. I was walking down the street. Anyway, I was walking past, and I saw these, like, I was stuck in a group of about 10 people on the side of the pavement. It's very narrow pavement, very narrow road. I was walking there, and as I was walking there, I should have brought the thing with me. I should have brought the leaflet he gave me. I was standing there, and I was stuck in the door, almost in the doorway. I was looking in, and there was a big, tall guy, African guy, standing there like that, who must have been the pastor. And he spoke Spanish. He said, come in, come in. And I looked in, and it was a Pentecostal church. And there were loads of people there singing. And you know, when I was younger, I'd go, oh, crackpots like that. But it's because I was forced to wait for more than a split second that I said, I'm really sorry, I've got to make a phone call. I'm English, I'm sorry. No, please come in. Jesus, that's what he said, come in. And so I stood and I turned to the entrance of this Pentecostal church. It was like a shop front, really, with just people singing. And I saw these people there. And you know what? It's a bit like, you know, you have a bit of a laugh, like the Kenny Everett sketch. Brother, brotherly love, like that. And I burst out laughing when I see Pentecostalists in America. But I saw these people who were like really poor. You could see they were like probably immigrants, some of them, or very poor Spanish people. And I saw them singing there just for a couple of minutes. And I saw this man, this like distinguished African guy saying, in a nice suit saying, Jesus being nice. And you go, so you see the power of religion itself, some of the things that it can do. And I think also that's probably what Hegel was getting at. That's why he stayed a Lutheran, because the power of religion, even if you like, it's so easy to take the piss out of it, isn't it, really? But at the same time, obviously, it seems to fulfill this really powerful need. And I think that's why the Dawkins Mehdi Hassan debate, it's well worth watching from that perspective. And furthermore, it's well worth watching because I think because religion runs throughout the phenomenology, it's always worthwhile having your background. So even if you think, well, I think Hegel wasn't an atheist in the end, or whatever you think he was a Lutheran, nevertheless, it's just there in the background and it jumps out on the page at you. And even though people are saying, look, this passage from Hegel says he's an atheist, and probably right, I don't know. But nevertheless, this thing keeps on jumping up, this Lutheranism. Okay, so sorry for that personal excursion into the Marquis de Sade. And also, who was the other one? Various other people, Richard Dawkins and everyone. So from this gorgeous, I'll just show you, turn around to the camera around and have a look at that. Look at this now. And there's a path, see the path there? There's the cliffs behind me. Woohoo! So, how long have I been? Oh my God, a long time. All right, I'll see you later. Too long, bye.